This is really about the interaction between yourselves and the panel. And what we want to do is to be able to develop some discussions. We really want to bring up ideas, sticking points, issues, why we have the issues that we do and how we can potentially solve them together. Now, I really do believe that if we're going to be able to achieve a systematic change, the system change, it has to be all of us, including all farmers. So this is a number one issue for us, is that we can't be us and them. It has to be us. And so we have to be able to do this together. But we need to also, as I was talking about, this parallel to agricultural systems, we need to strengthen the regen system and the local direct-to-market system. We need to build that up so that more of the others can jump over. More Diane Haggertys can take big chunks of land and regenerate them, and to be able to see there's all these extra young people coming onto their farms to work and to be able to do all sorts of things. We have a few fantastic speakers who are going to come up and introduce themselves now. To start with, I would like to invite Sam Johnson. Here we are, from Gum Grazing, and I came out to Sam's property, would have been about 6 months ago or something like that, one of the holistic management days, and I just loved it. I've got a lot of time for Sam, so please give us a little blurb about about what you're doing, and then we can invite the others up.
Okay. Okay. Just a quick blurb. Jared's given me a couple of pointers here, so I'll just go on that. The first one was where, how, and what do you farm? So I'm part of a business called Gum Grazing. We're out at Young in the grassy woodlands there, white box, yellow box, red gum country, so hence box gum is what the name refers to. How do we farm? We've had a long-term interest in holistic management, which goes back to the probably very early 90s when we first came across the ideas of a fellow called Alan Savory, and he made the amazing comment that livestock, which up till that point I'd considered a scourge on the landscape, he made the comment that depending on how you managed, you could actually make the animals positive on the landscape, and you could actually regenerate it. And that to me was a real epiphany, because I thought, well, here we've got this landscape, this grassy landscape that needs animals on it, and suddenly here's this guy telling me that not only can I make a living from the animals, but while I'm making the living, I can actually regenerate the land base. And I thought, well, that's just too good to be true. So we've followed those principles, and they work very well, very much as Walter talked about, rehydrating the landscape. You can't make it rain more, but as a farmer, you have almost total control over how effective that rainfall is. So that is the principle that we use. We work with the ecological processes on the land, the plants and the animals, how they interact together, and looking at the water cycle, all of those sorts of things. So presently what we farm is grass-fed beef and lamb and free-range pork, and they're all utilising a movement principle to move across the landscape. There's nothing in fixed areas, and we now market a large percentage of those products direct into Canberra, through the farmers market, online sales, deliveries to households, restaurants, cafes, that sort of thing. So the second one was, why and how do you engage in direct to market? So we started direct marketing back on a small farm we had in the 1990s, and it was that stage called relationship marketing. And it was a small farm of about 28 hectares, and we got the ideas. We'd come across savoury then, but we also had heard about Joel Salatin. So we ended up thinking that raising pastured meat chickens was the way for us to go in that small area, as well as we'd planted orchards and had egg birds and various things, vegetables. So we set up a direct market. We ended up building a small poultry abattoir that was licensed through Aquis at that stage to do our meat birds, and we also were processing birds for other farmers at that stage, doing pheasants, turkeys, ducks, geese, things like that. So that was quite a successful small farm, an awful lot of work. And then we moved after 2000 to a larger farm where we are now. And for the first 10 years there, we were basic commodity producers or trading livestock, and our focus was 100% on turning around the ecology of the farm. And after probably about 10 years, we thought, well, we're sick of doing it this way, the marketing that was, producing these beautiful animals, and then we'd take them into a market and they'd be picked up and taken off to a feedlot to stand in their own dung for a couple of months. And we thought, no, this is not what we want. We want to go back, because we had done some direct marketing. We loved dealing with our customers, hearing the feedback, having them come out to the farm, all that sort of stuff. So we started up box gum grazing, went back to breeding our own animals so we could get that landscape knowledge that Diane talked about, and the evolutionary benefits you get from selecting the animals off the land you got them on. And we've gone on and built that direct-to-market business up. Fortunately, we have a local abattoir at Cowra that we were able to use, and in the initial years we had a local butcher we could cut up. We did about 3 years with them till we got big enough that it was a problem for him, and then by that stage our children were interested in what we were developing, so they shocked us by saying they'll come back to the farm, and we went to the next step, which was to put in our own boning room and take hold of all of that. And so we've built that up. When we first started doing the direct marketing this time, we started with free-range pigs to build our brand, and the reason for that was that pigs are very easy to differentiate between industrial pigs and free-range pigs, and people really keyed into the flavour, but also the animal welfare issues and the whole of that, let alone the land impact issues. So briefly, relating to the direct marketing, what's worked well for you? One, being able to produce a quality product. People will only come to you for so long on a good slogan. It doesn't matter how good your story is. If the taste isn't good, they're not going to keep coming back to you. So you've got to be able to produce a quality product, and the beautiful thing is, if you get your soils going right, if you get the landscape function occurring well, your animals are going to be way better than what other people are conventionally producing without any extra effort. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
So I'd like to invite Cressida to come up now. So we don't have any dairies or cheeseries that are directly here in the ACT. We did once upon a time, but we don't anymore. And so we really wanted to be able to bring somebody in who is being really successful in this space. And Cressida, would you explain your situation and what's working for you, etc.?
Thanks, Jared. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. What a fantastic conference. So I live and work on Dharawal country, which is 2 hours south of here, in Robertson, in the beautiful Southern Highlands region. And my journey into the dairy industry began with a passion for agriculture and a real vision, I suppose, to want to contribute meaningfully to our food system. But I don't come from a family farm. my husband and I both met when we were in the wine industry in Sydney, back around the time of the Olympics. And we've always had a real passion for, I suppose, the fermentation of food and the science of agriculture. We bought our farm in Robertson in the GFC, actually, which was about the only time that we could buy into property. And our farm is not really a typical dairy farm. And I'd encourage you to, if you'd like to, jump online and have a look at our Instagram, Pecora Dairy, simply because I think having a look at pictures is a really great way to drop you into what I'm talking about. So our farm is 700 metres above sea level. We have very high rainfall, and we have these incredible pockets of cool climate rainforest still on our farm, which is just the most unbelievable privilege to be custodians of at the moment. We have huge wildlife corridors throughout our farm, and the wildlife and the ecology is really integral to the health of our pastures and the health of our sheep and the health of our milk and therefore our cheese. So we're so fortunate with the amazing, beautiful, natural ecosystem that we have, the animals, the native animals, and the biodiversity, which really contributes to this incredible ecosystem, which we're very fortunate is in fabulous balance, and is something that, as I said, is really, really important to us. So we are a sheep dairy and a cheesery. The sheep graze pastures. We're a pasture-based system, and our little factory is on our farm. The sheep that we milk are called East Friesians, and they're actually originally from the Netherlands, from Friesland, which is originally where the Friesian cows are from as well. And they're the racehorse of the dairy industry, really, for sheep. So they're very high-producing sheep. They're very suitable for Robertson, for a high rainfall area. People often don't associate sheep with a high rainfall area like ours, but they're very, very happy there. And they produce this beautiful, rich, creamy milk, which is incredibly suitable for cheese making. Sheep milk is very densely nutritious, very, very high-value product. And talking about value adding, we were always very intentional in, firstly, where we wanted to buy our property, and secondly, what we wanted to produce. So to produce cheese with sheep milk, and then also to turn all of that milk into cheese. So we don't sell any of our milk. We don't drench any of our sheep. We don't mules, and our East Friesian sheep have all of their tails. They have these little skinny rat's tails, and that's just the way they were bred. So great big udders, beautiful clean breech for people who know sheep, so clean bums, and a little small tail that we don't really need to take off, which is great. So the system that we use is a system that we've developed. There's not very many sheep dairies in Australia, so we just really researched from Europe and then adapted it to what worked for us. Lots of mistakes and working out what the successes were and just making it work for what we wanted to do. So we lamb every year, and the lambs spend the first 7 days with their mums, and then we start a process of share milking. So the lambs will stay with their mums during the day, and then they come into the dairy at night. We'll put them through the dairy, and then the lambs will stay in a nursery with food and water, and the ewes will go back on pasture, and then we'll repeat the process. And then once the lambs are heavy enough to be weaned, then we will go into a process of taking all of the milk for cheese making. So it does make it very labour intensive, but it is right for us and it's right for the sheep. It's a great life for us because we live with the seasons, which is something that we really, really thoroughly enjoy and value. And the sheep are raised on their mums, which is fantastic. We make a small range of cheeses. Our intention is to make a small range of cheeses really, really well. We are the first cheesemakers in Australia to produce a raw milk cheese. In 2018, the rules were changed to be able to make a raw milk cheese in this country, but there was no framework from the government by which cheesemakers were able to do that. So we worked with the authorities and scientists that they engaged to create a framework by which we could make a raw milk cheese in this country. So just very briefly, the premise behind it is actually rather, it's a best after rather than a best before. So there's scientific modelling which assumes that there is a certain bacterial load in the milk, and then through a process of maturation, those any harmful bacteria basically proliferates and then dies, so it makes it a very safe cheese. So we make 2 raw milk cheeses. One is a raw milk feta and then our raw milk Yarrawa. And Yarrawa is the indigenous name for the cool climate rainforest that is on our farm. In terms of where we sell our cheese, we started our business 17 years ago. And we started at farmers markets, and farmers markets have always been a really important part of what we do. It's important because, firstly, because there's not many sheep dairies in Australia, and still a lot of people are a little bit nervous about sheep milk cheese. Sometimes they think it might be a bit pungent or a bit unpleasant. In its raw form, sheep milk is just a little bit sweeter than cow's milk, so it's an absolutely beautiful milk to work with. But being able to tell that story and being able to talk about how we run the farm, how we deal with the sheep was really important to us. Dairy is a tricky industry. There's a lot of people who have preconceptions about the way animals are farmed in dairy. We want to tell a story that you can do dairy differently. So we have always done farmers markets. We do have some distributors. So my husband and I are the cheesemakers. We do have people who work with us who milk for us and work with us on the farm, but we do all of the cheese making. So we also do have some distributors who sell our cheeses mostly to restaurants. So we were, as I said, quite intentional to reach that top end of the market, which is the value end. And then we also, 3 years ago, started a little wine bar in Robertson, Pecora Cheese and Wine, and that's been really fantastic. It's a great... it's great for our community. We love seeing all of our locals come in, and it's a fantastic way when we're talking about working up the value chain. We can serve cheese on a cheese plate with a glass of wine, and obviously, you know, that's working right up the end of up the value chain. And then we also have a takeaway area where people can buy the cheese that they've tasted and take it away with them. So that's a model that's worked really, really successfully for us. And as I mentioned before, storytelling has been a really, really big part of that, which has allowed us to sell very successfully direct to market.
Great.
So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. You want to grab a seat? So thank you for that, Cressida. We have now Adam Lilleyman, who is a local producer, and he's a friend and part of the Rural Leaseholders Association. But I see the Lilleymans as being a real success story for the ACT farming community, in that there is a real inbuilt family ownership to this whole process. And John has dedicated this whole process to be able to eventually hand over to his kids, and who are now adults and capable of being able to be, you know, to do this in a really fabulous way. And the Lilleymans have also come on board with our whole farm planning process as well, that we've got through our team. And so, yeah, we'll be working closely with them. But come on up, Adam, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing as an intro.
Thanks, Jared. In 2012, my parents bought a 250-acre farm in Canberra, and it was supposed to be their retirement, but here they are 15 years later working probably harder than they ever did. So the property is named Amberley. It's down in Canberra, South Canberra, and it's a really beautiful spot on the Murrumbidgee. The astute of you would have noticed that we're a poultry farm. And so I started that business in 2017. I was doing an engineering degree, and I thought, how can, you know, I've got this amazing opportunity of this farm that very few people have, particularly at my age. And so I looked at it and said, how can we improve the soil? How can we improve the environment and also turn a buck, basically? And so we heard about people, friends of ours, that were using chicken tractors, where they be a series of very small trailers, and they drag them through the paddock. And I said, okay, can we do this on a big scale and make a dollar, but also add to the soil the things that are really missing, like phosphorus, nitrogen. We're on very old, very abused soil where we are. That's quite an old history on our farm. And so I started down this track of producing free-range eggs. So these are pasture-raised free-range eggs where we actually don't have containing fences. They're in the same paddocks that the cattle use, and the chickens are free to come and go from their houses as they please. And we use Maremma dogs is the security that we use for the chooks. And so it's been quite a wild ride over the last 9 years. But what's really changed that for me is how we market to the public. And so I started off with this preconception that you start a business and you sell your goods wholesale and someone else sells them for you. That's just, I don't know why that was what I came up with, but that's what I started off as. And so I went off and found all these shops to sell my eggs, and I sold them at a massive discount to these shops. And so we started this little farm gate fridge. It was running on a solar panel. People could come and buy eggs, and we were selling, at the start we're selling 5 dozen a day, and then it turned into 15, and then it turned into 30 dozen a day, and then COVID hit, and there was cars down the road lining up, and we were just selling eggs into people's cars. And then we started up at the market as well, which is our sort of major retail avenue. And then this funny thing happened where, I don't know, you guys would know maybe Fred McGrath and the guys out there at Majura, they started a farm gate shop. And around about the same time, my brother and my sister, they came on board with the farming, and we said, why don't we do this shop idea? And all of a sudden, the 30 dozen that I was selling from my front gate turned into, is roughly more like 300 dozen is what we're selling per day, roughly 100 to 250 dozen sort of per day through our shop. And so I don't have a wholesale model anymore. We just recently got rid of all of our wholesale customers, and the difference between wholesale and retail for us is the survival of the business. So by rethinking what I just preconceived as what a business looked like, and being able to get to those the retail market directly is the difference between life and death for us. And as a direct consequence, we interact directly with our customers. We're not just sort of dropping our eggs off and then chasing people for invoices. You can be in the shop and you'll see 100, 200 of your customers every day. So it's a really nice change to what I started off at and where I am now is such a difference. And so, as I was saying, my brother and sister, they came on board. My sister is now actively managing the cattle with my dad. And my brother, he runs our little micro market, which is actually like an honesty shop, we called it. So we applied the same idea as Fred and the same idea as my little fridge at the front gate. You can come, you put your money in the box, or you pay with your card, and you can take your goods. As a direct consequence, we can now also sell other farmers' produce in the region. So we're now I could call it like a mini food hub. We call ourselves a micro market. And so any farmer in the region, and there's more people in the region that sell and produce food than most of the public realize. They can sell to us. They set their prices. We charge a fixed margin, and if your product sells, then everyone wins. We get people coming for our eggs that are buying other farmers' goods, and likewise, we've got people coming for other farmers' goods, and they buy our eggs. So everyone wins in these models where you can cut out the Woolworths middleman or whichever middleman you've got. About right, Jared?
Yep, that's great. Thank you. Hey, mate, have a seat. The last of the introductions will be coming from Vince. So Vince Heffernan is he is a biodynamic producer. I have heard that it's potentially the best lamb in the world. Was it something along those lines? maybe going a little, gilding the lily a little. Yep.
Much bigger than that.
Yeah, here we are. Yep. Please speak to the farmers market aspect too, because that's an important
Okay,
part.
that's all right. No one else had to do that. Why do I have to do that? So, I don't know if you can hear that. Can you hear anything there? That's the noise that I was greeted with this morning when I parked the ute out the front here. And that's a superb parrot. And I'd like to think that that's sort of, I don't know if you can see that, that's a picture of a superb parrot. It'd be better if I had a camera on that, but I can show it to you later. And it's in a tree-eating wattle, and that'll work better, won't it, if I do that? Yeah, okay. And I'd like to sort of think that that's a little bit of what we're well known for, is working with biodiversity. So my name's Vince. The name of the farm's Moorlands. That's it up there. One of my ancestors was Pat Moore, and he was the first one to buy the farm that I'm on. So that was back in the 30s. That's the 1830s, obviously. So I'm sixth generation, and Pat got one of those cheap tickets out from Ireland. Lucky for Pat. I'm being photobombed by one of my dogs, Rose, in the background. But we're sheep farmers, and we do things a little bit differently in the sense that we're holistic, but we're also organic, biodynamic. And I've got this focus on doing on biodiversity, so that ecological focus in running the land that I'm on. And so that's seen us plant a lot of wattle trees because we have these superb parrots, the same ones that are here, but they're nesting on the farm. And someone from ANU has done their PhD on the ones nesting on the farm. And it's really important that they have that food source that comes from those trees that have been planted. And I'm talking 30 or 40,000 wattle trees on the farm have been planted in the last couple of decades. And coincidentally, or accidentally, not coincidentally, accidentally, those same wattle trees have added to the lamb. So the lamb's really good for us to eat because the sheep get to eat both the seeds and forage on the leaves of the wattle trees. So that wasn't deliberately done, but it's sort of an accidental benefit. And as a result, the lamb's got really complex, beautiful flavour. And we've won many awards for that, including Best Lamb in the Universe, just recently.
Of course.
And we're very modest about that, of course. I sell my lamb. I suppose that's what you want to know next, where I sell my lamb. So if you go to moorlandslamb.com.au, I have to put that plug in at least 3 times. So moorlandslamb.com.au, we have a website and people order whole lambs or half lambs. And we initially started by doing delivery around Canberra, and we realised that had hairs on it. It was just something impossible for us to do. So instead we took up thanks to the Johnsons, we took up the Joel Salatin method of going to one spot and getting people to come to us. And that one spot was Canberra Region Farmers Market. And so they'd come and collect their box of lamb there, cryovac up, cut up. And that worked really well for us. It was also an opportunity to sell some lamb just by the cut. So we could sell a few extra lambs. People could buy a leg, they could buy a rack, they could buy some backstrap, sausages, mince, whatever they wanted, and take it home, try it, and then if they liked it, they'd go and then hopefully order a whole lamb or a half lamb, which was at a much reduced price. And that means that we currently process about 35 lambs a week this way. And we sell into Sydney and we sell into Canberra. And that keeps us fairly busy. I love the farmers markets and I think that they're a really good way for us to connect. And so we're asked what's different about the way that we sell, and I think it is that lack of someone in the middle. So the supermarkets tend to be a block on information moving from the farmer through to the consumer. And I think that's quite deliberate because a lot of the times the stories about those farms are not good stories. And they don't want those bad stories to go through, but be they animal welfare or be they the runoff of nitrogenous fertiliser runoff into the streams that are killing the fish, or the carbon levels in the soil going from 8% at the very worst, we heard from Alder, right down to 0.5%. So they don't want those stories put out there. So they make sure that if you go into any supermarket and you try and find out where that banana, where that orange, or where that pork chop came from, you'll know nothing about it. And so the farmers market gets rid of that blockage. So there's just that direct line of sight from the farmer to the consumer, nothing in between. And I was sort of criticised very early on at a farmers market by another guy who said, you turn up in your dirty old ute with your dirty old eskies, you put them out on a dirty old hay bales. It was a very dry summer that year, obviously. And I thought I was in my best clothes and all that. But and he said, and people just flock to you. And I think it's because we've got good meat, but I think there's also that it's authentic. There's just no bullshit in it. What they see is what they get. And sure, people aren't buying it because I'm incredibly good looking. I've come to that conclusion, sadly but true. They're buying it because they like the meat and because it's probably good value. So I think that's part of it, but it's also communicating that, and we do that through our website, moorlandslamb.com.au, but also a monthly newsletter that goes out to a couple of thousand people where we tell people about how they can buy our lamb, when the cut-off for the orders are and that type of thing. But also we tell them a little bit of folksy stuff about the farm. Might be my partner Colette, how she's growing princess pumpkins this year, or the basil's going really well, so we're just going to make a bucket load of pesto, or that the chooks are off the lay because it's winter time, or that the kelpies had pups, that sort of folksy sort of stuff. But we also then include a paragraph telling them about the stuff that we're doing and how it's making a difference. And it might be something as diverse as, well, we've got Phragmites and Kumbungi growing in the creeks now because we're grazing differently, and that's able to clean the water as it flows through the farm because the biofilm on the base of that collects all the silt, and then the tadpoles from all the frogs in our stream eat that biofilm. And so we're able to build the stories about what we're doing, or that we're planting Bassaria, which is another understory plant, a bit like wattle, and how that's a host plant for Hymenoptera, for wasps. And those wasps are a natural part of that predator layer that keeps the insect populations in check, so we don't have locust plagues or fly problems and these sort of things. So by passing on this information, we can educate our buyers, but we can also connect with them. And it's drip feeding, so someone who 20 years ago first bought a lamb off me has probably had 200 of those newsletters by now. And so it might be only 200 paragraphs, but it's essentially they've read a book on farming. And they've learnt what we're doing, how it's different, and how that biodiversity works, and how it helps the parrots, and how it helps a whole host of other organisms on the farm, and how we're able to rebuild things. But it also helps them understand why what they're doing by spending the dollar with me makes a difference to the landscape. And I think that's working okay, touch wood.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Vince. Okay, and I would like to invite Tammi and Lucy to come on up to the panel as well. So now this is our next lot of interactive kind of,
You get it?
So what I would like for you to do is to start thinking about some questions that you would like to be able to ask of the panel, and for us to start some conversations. So I'm just going to kick it off with a couple which are slightly, well, maybe a little bit outside of this direct-to-market, but please start your direct-to-market questions. But we've got a couple here which are around glyphosate. The question is, given that glyphosate is a biocide and locks up elements needed by plants, what's being done in Australia to reduce, stop the use of glyphosate? So I wonder, and I don't want to, I don't want to beat up farmers who are still relying on herbicides in the process of getting what they need to get done on their farms. But at the same time, there is a potential to be able to move to alternative versions. So I wonder whether, if you wanted to speak to that, anybody, in what you do and what you're doing. As far as asking our federal government to ban glyphosate, I think we're a little while off, to be honest. So I think it's going to be a people movement. It's going to be what farmers are doing. They're differentiating themselves against conventional, and then that will be something which then can be valued by the consumer, by the citizens who are purchasing and eating that. So I guess I would put that out to anybody who would like to answer that around the glyphosate issue. Glyphosate's Roundup, by the way.
I'll have a go. Why not? I don't think there's going to be much done about it for the exact reasons that you mentioned. I think it's one of the biggest issues in farming is that if you drive from here to Harden or Cootamundra or anywhere where there's cereal cropping, the entire landscape is boom sprayed with glyphosate. But not just Roundup, but also with a whole host of other really nasty stuff, from pre-emergent herbicides right through to fungicides. You know, we were listening to Walter talking about fungi before. So if fungi is so important in our soils, you're going out and you're spraying fungicide because you've got striped rust because you keep putting cereal crop in, and so they have to do it. They have to do it if they're going to get a crop off. So we have to stop thinking about this silver bullet solution, and we have to have a much more holistic approach if we're going to survive. And we've got to be able to keep telling that story, but we've also got to get consumers to buy in. They've got to say, okay, so I'm not going to buy, you know, the excuse me, but the Aldi cheapest food on the planet type option. We're going to spend a little bit more. We're going to spend a little bit more of what we make on food and support something that doesn't destroy what's around us.
Yep, fabulous. Is there others who would like to speak to that? Yep, Sam?
Look, I was just going to say, as someone who doesn't use that grazing systems are now, we know how to make grazing systems regenerative, and that's been worked out for years. Cropping systems are a disaster, and Diane's one of the few people I think could talk to that. What do you do about taking Roundup out of it and yet still have a cropping system? The croppers are nowhere on sorting this out. Grazing people, we know how to do it. Whether we're doing it's another thing, but cropping's a disaster.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That's well spoken. Diane, do you want to speak to that just quickly? Yeah, I might just bring it across. There we are. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a bit of a story to that. I guess it's context related too with Australia, with the drying climate, and also being able to maintain enough water in the landscape. Is that tillage is not a really good option for cropping either. So we've got to weigh up whether it's a use of a herbicide or tillage, and unfortunately tillage breaking up soil structure is very damaging to microbial communities as well. So having said that, what we've seen over a period of time is that, a bit like what Cole Seiss is seeing on his properties too, and other people that are doing pasture cropping, as that soil ecology changes and the more preferred native species and that come to proliferate, then you don't need to use those chemicals because the spaces are taken up by those plants, and particularly if they're summer active and you're growing a winter wheat crop, then you're not needing those chemicals, and we've been able to experience that. But on other land, and that doesn't happen overnight though either, so that's where as a society we've got to sort of value the outcomes of change in soil ecology and what's produced, but also to support the farmers along the way to achieve that, because it isn't something that occurs overnight. And I guess like with Walter's saying, when you're building that microbial community that prevents the uptake of toxins, whether it be via the root or through the plant surface, you can actually help to buffer those impacts. And we are still using herbicides on parts of the farm. There's lower rates because they're highly effective now, whereas in a traditional sense, a lot of the rates have been going higher and higher because they're losing effectiveness, but also lower frequency because we've got that mixed grazing system, so you're not using it for years on different parts of the landscape. So I think there's a whole lot of things that need to be looked at as we move on that pathway.
Yep, go for it, Walter. Yep.
Look, thank you very much, Sam. You're absolutely right. but we've got to get beyond just the silver bullets at that level, because what people don't know is that we're using a lot of glyphosate as a desiccant prior to harvest, grains, and so a lot of the grains we're eating have got high levels of glyphosate, and it's disastrous on our microbiome in our guts, because it's there that it's doing, again, enormous damage to the microbiology, causing inflammation, leaky gut symptoms, and then, of course, that's one of the first things inducing cancers and what have you. So, you know, it's a much, much more complicated and dangerous scenario, whereas we get sold, oh, get rid of that weed, but we don't look at all the consequent flow-ons. And so once the community's aware and educated and informed of these consequences and risks, I think that's the basis of change.
Just want to make one more point. We actually have had our grains tested in a number of labs, both in Australia and the US, and tested for glyphosate per parts per billion, even on paddocks where we've known it has been used up front as a desiccant prior to sowing, and had no glyphosate residues detected at parts per billion. So I think, as Walter was saying, in the interim, while people are transitioning, changing that soil ecology, making things possible, yeah, we can work things out, but always with the intention of getting those things right out of the way.
Yeah, and I guess I also just wanted to just to say that the concept of regenerative is making incremental improvements. It's not jumping ship like immediately, because you still need to be able to make a profit and you still need to be able to have a transitioning period. So, so that's always something we need to take into account. It's that regenerative is those incremental improvements, starting with your baseline and moving in a direction which you're continuing to work in that space. So, and were you going to say something too?
I just wanted to add something from a governance perspective. First of all, I take the lead of people like Di, you know, who can show that on Broadacre you can move away from them and share those successful stories. That's where the change comes from. Other farmers can take encouragement from that story. But it's not, I don't think it's educating consumers, because like that's not where change comes from in these things. It's a production problem, and that's a governance problem. So the Global Biodiversity Framework that was ratified at COP15 in Montreal a year and a half ago actually has a commitment, all nations committed to a 50% reduction in agrochemicals by 2030. Now, they've never met their targets in any of these frameworks, but it's there as an aspiration now. In Australia, though, the APVMA has long had a revolving door with the industry. So you have a really serious governance issue in terms of changing any regulation. I agree with Vince. I don't think it's going to happen, or Sam, one of you said, I don't think it's going to happen soon. But the pressure from farmers showing a different way, and organizations actually putting in submissions to government to say, get the industry off your damn boards, and then maybe we'll have some real change.
Great, okay, that's fabulous. Okay, so we've got a question around food hubs. So food hubs are places where processing, packaging, and distribution can occur. And currently we don't have any formal food hub here in the ACT. And it is something that the ACT government is looking into, and looking at what options might be available for us to be able to support that as a concept. But I'm just wondering, from the panel, is there any thoughts around how a food hub actually may be able to, you know, something which is new, I guess, would be able to be implemented, and how it might benefit farmers in general? And I guess to a certain degree, your Southern Harvest is that kind of, it is doing that, but it's with very restricted resourcing. And I guess that's a major issue. And Lucy, you might want to speak to this.
Yeah, totally. So Southern Harvest has been working as an aggregator and a distributor of produce and of for local farmers in the region. But as you say, we're a pretty small cooperative, not-for-profit. We're farmer-led and often running on the smell of an oily rag. You know, we don't necessarily have the resources to be building a big state-of-the-art food hub right in the middle of Canberra, but we'd love to see one. You know, at the moment we're plugging a hole and we're filling a gap that farmers told us needed to be filled. They needed a way to get their produce to customers. We're filling that gap at the moment, but we'd love to see that grow. I mean, a lot of the farmers that that are our members aren't necessarily, in a suburb of Canberra or close to those population centres. And so what we really need is to have more places, like what the Lilleymans and the McGraths are doing, close to where people live, so that it's easy, it's accessible, it's convenient for them to eat local food. A lot of the time people talk about, oh, I wish I could shop at the farmer's market, but it's too expensive. When you go and do the maths, it's actually not too expensive. That's a real kind of false thing that people have in their head, that it's more expensive to buy ethically produced food, it's more expensive to buy local food. Often what it costs you is time and convenience, and it's going to make you change the way that you think about what you're eating and when you're eating it. So eating local seasonal produce means not eating tomatoes in the middle of July because they're not in season. And so once people make that transition to eating local seasonal food, making it convenient for them is going to really help to shift that paradigm, to shift people away from that, oh, well, I can just drop by the supermarket tonight and grab something immediately. It's about making it easy for people to do that. And a food hub in Canberra would make it really easy for people to be buying local food, and the farmers markets are really excellent. We've got a couple of different farmers markets around town, but if you've got kids doing sport on a Saturday morning, it's a bit hard to get to the farmers market. Or if you're not a morning person, it can be a bit hard to get to the farmers market, right? And so having a food hub means that local food isn't just a weekend thing, it's something that people can live and breathe every single day of the week.
Yep, fabulous. Yeah, and I guess to kind of go on top of that, the farmers market is a model that works. If anybody's been there to Epic on a Saturday morning, it's insane. There is a lot of people there, and there's great produce being offered up there. And like what Vince has expressed as well, this is it's a social connection. It's a real kind of connection between the farmer and the consumer in a way that you just cannot get in a supermarket. Now I know all of us go to the supermarket to buy food. That's just that's our nuts and bolts.
I
the
don't.
Majority of our. Okay.
I think there are lots of people that don't actually.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess what I'm saying is that the supermarkets are successful because we have moved into convenience, into that concept. But what we're missing is connection with the growers. And so I think that having farmers markets and multiple other versions of direct to market is what is required to be able to bridge that gap. So you wanted to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of things that the idea of convenience as that's something that trumps all else. Our little micro market is open 12 hours a day, and as I mentioned, it's actually completely unstaffed. It's an honesty shop. And so people can come and go at times of the day when they perhaps normally wouldn't shop, and they can go in there quietly, get the items that they want, and they can check out. So there are models that are not a supermarket that still can be convenient, and they can be good value, and they can be fresh produce. But sort of taking a step back on the food hub idea, what I think is more important is that there are reduced regulatory, basically red tape for farmers in the ACT and the region to actually produce that food that needs to go into the hub. So the step before the hub is what I'm sort of thinking about. And our family has recently been looking to develop our operation to expand and protect our operation against both climate change and disease and things like that. And we've recently been knocked back for reasons that are, I think, short-sighted in the scheme of food security for a growing population. And so I think, we went to people who know us and they know our farming methods. We know that they know our history of conservation, and there's lots of goodwill for us and for farmers, particularly in government, NRM and EPSDD and all those departments. But they live in this framework of regulation that is very hard for them to get out of. And so people people in positions are willing, they want to help, but they find roadblocks that are bigger than what they can tackle. So we need a full restructure. If we want to produce food in Canberra, in the region, and on a meaningful scale, we need to be able to let farmers get through that red tape and reconsider how that red tape actually applies to farmers.
Yeah, fabulous. That sounds great. Is there any other thoughts on food hubs that anybody wants to talk about just straight up? Otherwise, we can move on to another fairly big issue, which is the majority of our farmers here in the ACT currently are meat producers. Do we have a show of hand of farmers who are meat producers that are there? Yep. Yep. Now, how easy is it, or no, maybe put your hand up if it's a straightforward process for you to be able to get your animals to a local abattoir? Is it? Yeah. Is it? Yeah. Well, I guess where I'm leading the question towards the reality of what Tammi brought up earlier, in that they're closing everywhere, and being able to have smaller growers have access to them is becoming less and less, possible. So, I mean, we have a little, so for where we are in East Gippsland, we have a little abattoir down in Orbost, which is just a tiny little abattoir. But if that closed, the next place that we would be able to go is Warragul. That's 5 hours. That means we won't farm anymore. That's it. So if that closes, what happens? And so, this is an ongoing issue of like, well, is it just going to be the big end of town that can get access to processing? And I think that's an issue of our sovereignty coming back again. But I guess, show of hands, if there was an abattoir that was in or very close to Canberra, would you use it? Yeah, that's pretty convincing. Yep. Okay, great. I guess one of the ways that we could potentially look at that, and that will come up in our conversations later when we break out, maybe some different governance models. But Tammi, would you mind just having a quick talk around governance models for abattoirs and how that might work? Let's say it's a fixed abattoir that is is made here in the, is set up here in the ACT. What sort of issues might come up around that governance? And what are maybe some solutions?
So the key issues around governance are farmer participation in the governance, right? Whether it's a co-op or whether it's owned by some other organization of some sort, farmers should be involved in the governance of the model. So ours is being governed by the collective of farmers, but actually the farmers who don't make their living from selling meat are non-voting members of the collective. So it's those of us whose livelihoods are dependent on the slaughter. We make the decisions within the collective. And the others are happy to sign up as non-voting members, knowing that it has a material impact on us in a way that's very different to them. I just reviewed 9 feasibility studies from across 7 from Australia, 1 from Scotland, and 1 from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And every single one of them, even the one included from some of the big agricultural consultants that really focus on the kind of commodity end of things, say that if you're going to build an abattoir, make sure farmers are decision makers in the governance model. So I think that's like the really key takeaway, so you don't end up losing the slaughtering facility again, or you don't raise the prices beyond what they can do, or you don't change the scheduling so that large lots come through instead of smallholders having access. So the cooperative model, I mean, we would advocate some form of cooperative, whether you're formally a co-op or not. Like in our case, we're an incorporated association. That model of cooperation that serves the interests of the members, we would argue, is the most resilient. Something that is a third party. When slaughter is, this came out of my PhD, when slaughter or butchery for that matter is treated as a link in a supply chain, and anyone can go be that link. That's their job. That's their new model. That's their new business. You actually take it out of the metabolism of farming, where farming needs processing to get meat to customers, right? It's not a link. It's intrinsic to the nature of farming livestock. So if you let just any Joe Blow own that system to extract profit for shareholders usually, it will eventually break, at least for the small end of town. None of them are enduring. There's not a single model that is a profit model, like as in shareholder profit model, that is continuing to serve local communities. They're all disappearing. So they either go broke because they can't keep up with the regs, or they just cut us all out. So that the key thing in governance is not so much whether it's a PTY Ltd or a co-op, or those are debatable points, but decision makers. And that's a crucial aspect of food sovereignty. People who are materially impacted by the decisions being made should always be involved in the decision making, whether it's about First Peoples or farmers or hungry people, whatever it is, those people should be involved in the decisions about them.
We had a question as well, for just a quick one about your micro abattoir. How many animals per week are going through yours, or could?
Yes, so we applied for and were granted permission to do up to 6 cattle, or it's basically the livestock equivalent. So it's 30 pigs or 48 sheep, and that's only 1 day a week. And we only applied for that because, for a number of reasons. We want to be primarily a farm that needed an abattoir, not primarily an abattoir that happens to be on a farm. And we weren't trying to trigger a land use change. It's still an ancillary use to the farming. So that was, and we also looking at the tonnage of organic waste produced and retained on farm. It's well under the EPA thresholds for what could present a risk to local waterways if there was, for some reason, not contained in its processing. So that's ours, six cattle.
Gotcha, great, okay.
Can I actually ask a question, just to break the mold here? What's the impact of the optics of an abattoir on its likelihood of being, or where they are located around the country? For example, I wonder whether or not an abattoir in Canberra, getting one established is a long shot, right? Because of just how it would appear. Even though many people in Canberra eat meat, so long as it's not in my backyard, kind of.
To the swings in Canberra.
Yeah, exactly. Does that play a role?
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest hurdle that we dealt with was the lifestyle neighbours with their his and hers lawnmowers across the road, taking us to VCAT. So that was by far the biggest hurdle, and that's why the reforms that the Food Sovereignty Alliance has put to every state is to change those rules so that you don't have to advertise for something that is below the EPA thresholds, because it's not a land use change and it's ancillary to farming and it should be treated as such. But those neighbours, I mean, the people who took us had owned the land for 18 months when they took us to VCAT, bought that 15 acres for $2.5 million as a weekender, and they led the battle against us. So it took 550 days from putting in our DA to getting our permit. But the good news is the VCAT member, her decision was such a resounding win, because they tried to claim that abattoirs weren't intrinsic to agriculture. The same week that a chapter of my PhD was being published in a journal, and it's called The Intrinsic Infrastructure of Agroecology. So it was fairly compelling evidence. And she, in her findings though, she removed like 7 of the conditions that council had put on the original notice of decision to grant a permit. So it's a really good precedent to have out there, but it's absolutely one of the considerations. The guys, I don't know if you're aware, but Wagga, there's a lamb farm trying to build an abattoir at Ura. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that's, yeah, Ara, see? And they're trying to build it sort of in the middle of quite a large farm. And there are signs everywhere up there that say, no abattoir in Ara. And I'm like, whoa, it took me a while to find the news. And it's the same as us. They're just trying to do it for just for their own farm, not in sight of anyone, not going to be a nuisance to anyone, but they're dealing with that. That social license is a real problem. And that's us inheriting the legacy of industrial production, right?
Yep, thank you, Tammi, that's great. So I have one for Cressida. What were the main barriers to setting up cheese production? Did you need to get each batch of milk tested or final product?
Thanks for the question. There are really high barriers to entry, I think, for cheese makers in Australia, and particularly what we do in terms of raw milk cheese making. Because we're a sheep milk dairy, we do sit outside the cow's milk dairy framework. So we have to test every single batch of our raw milk cheese, which does obviously make it a really really expensive process. And we do have a whole bunch of other testing that we have to do for our other cheeses, which just depends on what they are and how much we've made for testing of those batches. But while we're talking about the landscape of food, I wanted to just give you a little bit of an idea of the landscape of dairy. We've talked a lot about meat production in Australia. So there used to be dairy farmers in the ACT, and where we are in the Southern Highlands, it used to be a very, very vibrant dairy district. But nationally, we've got under 450 small dairy farmers left, and they're leaving the industry hand over fist. And the main reason is because of the small number of processors and that tightly held retail market, and we talked about it earlier today. It's really, really hard when you're a price taker and you're milking so few cows to have any bargaining power. So working up the value chain is one of the ways to have a really profitable business, and for generational dairy farms to have really profitable businesses. And in 2022, I actually started a non-for-profit organisation called Dairy Cocoon about working up the value chain. And I have a website of skills and resources, industry specific, because I had so many dairy farmers coming to me and saying, well, you know, we're about to walk away. This is just too hard. You know, how do we do what you're doing, working up the value chain? So it was a way for dairy farmers to start to have the conversation about potentially moving up the value chain. And there's so many different ways that you can look to do that. There's so many, I mean, we talked about cooperatives just then. There's lots of ways to skin that cat. But I think the other piece that we need to consider is consumers' understanding and respect of small producers. And that's where farmers markets plays a really, really important way. And it's a way that small producers can go and tell their story, and people become really invested in who you are and what you do. And that was what I mentioned earlier. But it's hard graft going to farmers markets, right? We did it for 9 years at Carriage Works with Vince. And my kids have grown up on Vince's amazing lamb. And it is extraordinary. He's the best lamb producer in the world. But it is a really wonderful way to tell that story. And we are such a commodity-focused, nation of selling commodities, which has been very, lucrative for us. But we need to make sure that we tell the stories of our small producers so consumers can understand and respect what we do.
Great, thanks. One for you, Sam. Given the nature of your fresh meat product, what has been your key levers in terms of continuity and let's just go on across continuity and just bear with me while they keep going up and down according to people voting. Hang on. I guess it's the supply issue. How do you keep that supply going? And so it would be the same for you as well, Vince. This thing of being able to have regular. How do you do that?
Well, we market all year round, except we have a break, 3-week break, 4-week break over Christmas. The question around supply gets a lot easier, I think, in my experience, out of two things. As your soil gets and landscape gets more resilient, you iron out the fluctuations in the rain. So the rainfall's not near as important. And the health of the food going into the animals is much more stable. So I think their rumen's much more stable, and we run a leader-follower system. So we've got our little market lot going ahead of the main mob, and they just get the ice cream, and they're not, their density's quite low. So they get to select, and then the main mob follows through them in the next day or two. The pigs obviously are supplemented while they're on pasture, so that irons out that. And the other thing is we select heavily on the animals in the breeding. So over generations, you actually you select back the animals that do well on your pasture. We wanted to have an animal that will produce an early maturing, good quality off our grass resource base, whatever that happened to be. So the process is those animals that do well on that, they're the ones you breed from. Those that don't do well on it, they go cull, you don't breed from them. Animals get sick, you cull them. And then over the generations, you end up with an animal that performs better and better on your circumstance because the animal is actually then reflecting the country. So I think that those two combinations, you've got the animals, but you've also got the resilience of the land. And it surprised me how we're able to, do that really. And I think it's going to get easier with time.
Great. Well, I'm personally quite interested in that, especially over that winter period when everything seems to slow down. Whether you can maintain a high quality.
Yeah. Well, I grew up. When I grew up there, we spent all summer cutting hay, and we spent all winter feeding it out. And we haven't fed hay for the whole time. We don't feed hay. We don't supplement.
So you got dry standing hay.
We got our feeders in. Our haystack is in the paddock. And our role is to manage that haystack, but keep the balance between carbohydrate, protein in their rumen stable, and let them basically express the landscape, if you like. And we'll end up with our animals perform very well on our land. I think we could take them to a higher fertility land, and they would not perform as well. Or vice versa. It's like these ones suit this valley.
Yep.
And so it's just a process.
Yep. Fabulous. Okay, so I have another one which is coming in around, and anybody or everybody on the panel are welcome to put their 2 bobs worth in here. But I guess it's the issue of young people trying to get access to farming, and I've got my own thoughts on this as well. But I would really like to have your opinions on how do you think that there will be opportunities for young people to get access into farming, especially as we know that the average Australian farmer is 63. So knowing that there needs to be some form of a transition, but how are we going to make that transition actually happen? Any ideas? Yeah.
Your family one first?
Well,
AFSA, the Food Sovereignty Alliance, has been working on this problem for years, which is why we started FUPL, Farming on Other People's Land, about 6 years ago, quite a while. And that was sort of to try and make people alert to the fact that you can share land. If you have enough, you can share it with other young people, like we do on our farm. And we're trying to show you can do that without charging rent, because we don't want to become the rentier class. We want to overthrow them and not have one. And so when people say, but shouldn't people help us pay our mortgage? And I'm like, sure, if they get to keep the land, right? If they're paying the mortgage, shouldn't they get to keep the land too? People find that surprising. I'll let it sit with you for a minute. But the other thing that AFSA is working on now is an agrarian trust. They have one in the US already, and there's typical of the US. They are very focused on philanthropy to try and buy land and get access to more land. At the moment, our focus is going to be trying to transfer existing agricultural land into the trust to ensure it's in agriculture in perpetuity, that you can bring other people on to be farming, but not only those who were the original landholders, the others coming on have the same kind of secure tenure. So it's not just access, it's tenure. It's the fact that they can't be told to leave, that they get a chance to stay and farm. And that's like the sort of stopgap measure while we work seriously on what would land reform look like in a country like this, where it's being snapped up by not just overseas interests, it's development, it's land banking, it's carbon farming. That's just another form of land grabbing in many cases. So we would like to see regulatory reform that stops that happening, so that everyone can actually have access to secure land tenure.
Yeah, it'd be good to get some other ideas too, please.
So I will comment, I guess, on not so much young people getting into farming. I don't know how to solve that problem, but keeping young people in farming, and this might be specific to the ACT, but relates to how, as leaseholders in the ACT instead of landowners like you are in New South Wales, making adjustments to your lease to allow for kids to build houses on farm is currently very much a grey area, and it's unclear if it's possible in some cases. And so if you want to keep, like, I'm always grateful for the fact that my parents bought that farm, and that's my way in, but we need to make change around adjusting leases for farmers so that young farmers can start families and continue that farming line. At the moment, ACT farmers are treated the same way a developer is when they try to make a change to a farm, to add a house. Like, this is a house going on a single house going on a farm. We're not developing this place. And the cost to us, to give you a real idea, is 75% of the increase in the value of the lease is what you'll pay when you put a new house on a farm in the ACT, which is crazy. If you're buying a block in Narrabundah somewhere and putting 4 townhouses on it, absolutely, that sounds perfect. If you're a farm trying to get kids to stay on farm so they can produce food, different case, so a different application.
And I think as well, there's been some conversation, especially in the ACT, around securing land use for agriculture. So, you know, the Majura Valley and the kind of conflict there with the airport and airport developments and what that's going to look like in the future. So I think if we actually want to keep farmland in the ACT, then we really need to secure that land to continue being farmland. There's also been some conversation around taking heritage land, so things attached to Lanyon Homestead and places like that, and making that available to people who want to start small-scale, mostly market gardens, things like that. And part of that, to get young people into farming, is to provide training pathways. So Fiona Buning is sitting down the front here, and if you're interested in talking about urban farmer training pathways, she's the one to talk to.
Fabulous, thank you. Vince?
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think there's a desire for a lot of the urban population to have time on farms, and having access to farms in some way, shape or form, I think is important, because right now the way that it happens is they go out and they buy a block of land, and often the consequences of that aren't good. Some of the most prolific growers of blackberries and serrated tussocks are able to buy the land and then sell it a couple of years later, and then the legacy of that lives on for 30 years for about a 10-kilometre radius. And that's not including the foxes and feral pigs, but there's got to be a better way, and we have to be able to meet those needs. And I think as farmers we need to think about that. How do we get those people to come out, enjoy what's there, without coming out to try and bugger up the landscape more broadly?
Yep, okay. Anybody else want to speak to that directly? Yep, okay, cool. All right, so there was just somebody made a comment on the glyphosate question, to just take it back a little bit. Christine Jones recommends a tillage event followed by an immediate cover crop over the use of broad-scale herbicide. It's just out there. And why is there limited marketing of product origin and or product method, i.e. Regen, at some of our CBR local markets, i.e. Fishwick and Belconnen markets? Well, I can speak to that. All of that food comes from Sydney. That's what happens. So yeah, or Queensland, correct. But they go to the Sydney markets. So we know, my partner Aminia and I, we sell roast chestnuts in the winter. And if there is a producer of chestnuts in Cooma, all of those go up to Canberra before then they get brought down, up to Sydney before they get brought down to Canberra. And so there's this issue that it drives right past, and that there isn't that kind of capacity in the system to be able to work that out. Great, good. So I guess let's keep moving on. Well, one of the ones that came up early, which I can't find anymore because there's so many great questions in here, was burnout for smaller farmers. Now, some of you have touched on this already, and I know from my own farming that when you're doing lots of things, it's really hard to do lots of things. So would anybody like to talk to burnout on, when you're trying to do everything, be the marketer, be the farmer, everything in between?
Yeah, I'll have a crack at that. So this takes us back to the 90s, where we first sort of started into this, and we were very interested in permaculture and the idea of the polyculture. We thought, makes sense ecologically, blah, 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 we'll do that. So we had, we had the chickens, the fruit, vegetables, and yeah, it was basically the burnout in the end, and which sort of made me realise in the end that unfortunately scale does matter. And it's as easy for us to move a mob of 500 cattle as it is to move a mob of 20. And the value in that is incomparable. So, but also in recent times, we've been able to build the business in a way that has made it attractive to the next generation. So we've now got several of them back on the farm, and they're now, we had enough scale that we could replace the butchers we were using, and immediately there were a couple of incomes for them to come back. So none of us had to give up an income for them to come back. And with the direct marketing, it allowed them to bring back skills they'd learned doing marketing and stuff in other areas. So it really opened up the possibility for the next generation to immediately come in, learn the ropes, and be part of the growing business. And we didn't have to step out of the way. We could, nurse them through, and then they could take over. But the scale issue is a tricky one around burnout.
Great, thank you, Adam.
Yeah, certainly +1 for scale. I'm really comfortable with the level of the number of chickens we have, because it allows me to employ 3 staff that we can that every day and every week they're more involved in the business. They can do more. That where I was a critical piece before, they're becoming part of those pieces. And in the last year and a half or so, since my brother and sister have come on board, and with the help of my wife and my brother's partners and things, it's about creating this community where each person becomes less critical, and it allows you to share that work around. That's awesome.
Right. Any other thoughts on burnout?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think in my experience in the food sovereignty movement for the last 13 years or whatever, I know a lot more people doing really, really good work with NGOs who get burnout than farmers, to be honest. And I've been trying to analyze, like, what is it? Like, where does the burnout come from, and where doesn't it? And the farmers who I think end up the most burnout, like Sam said, it's when you're trying to do too much, but also when there are a bunch of things out of your control, where you keep feeling disempowered, whether it's because of the land use planning problems or food safety program, or access to abattoirs, or all these other things outside your control. When you're constantly bumping against the stuff out of your control, and you're not getting the satisfaction of the daily work in your control, and you haven't worked out what's the right scale for you to be working at, and you don't have the community around you yet to be making sure the load's spread, so you're not one person doing everything, that's where I think burnout comes from. Like on our farm, I can't even imagine somebody being burnt out. Like, we wake up so excited kind of for every day, because there are 7 of us working on the farm, like on this tiny little farm. And it's so great. We get to do all these jobs we enjoy and enjoy them. And because we've taken control of the things that are outside our control. We meet with the government to say, you really need to fix this, instead of going, the government really needs to fix this. So I think it's about bringing things into your locus of control, and having that community, for sure, is a huge part of it for us.
I'll just make one more comment about that. Yeah, I think burnout is definitely real. We made, as I said, a intentional decision to always remain quite small, but work in the very top end of the market, at the highest value end, and it's why we went into sheep milk rather than cow's milk. But our kids have grown up our youngest learned to count back in the days where there were cash. You know, he would be at the farmer's market counting the cash, and you know it's been their whole lives, right from little guys. And doing farmers markets is wonderful. It's really fantastic to have that connection with the consumer, but it also means that you've got to get up at 3 a.m. and then get back and, you know, milk the animals and do all the rest of things that you have to do. But I think there's no easy answer to it. It's whatever sort of works for you and works for your family. But I think one of the key things is educating consumers and helping them understand why they should pay 3 times more for my cheese than they should for what they get at the supermarket. And it's really, really important. And again, to me, gets back to storytelling, how in agriculture we can tell the stories of our small producers who are doing extraordinary things with sustainability and working their farms so amazingly well, particularly on a worldwide stage. We've got such, you know, great a story to tell, and in my opinion, we don't do it well enough.
Great, thank you. I've got a couple of questions for Vince. What acacia trees or wattles have you been planting that the sheep are eating? And I'm guessing pretty well all wattles are edible for pasture, you know, for perennial pasture. But and also the other one, Vince, while you've got the stage, is what abattoirs are you using from where you are?
So we're at Cowra. I know people who are still getting kill at Gundagai, and I obviously know people who are getting kill at Picton as well. But Cowra shut down in 2007 as part of John Howard's push into employment reform, and so we went to Junee. Heath Newton runs Junee, runs a good abattoir, but like all of these, you use the word vertical, where they've got Junee Gold, and Cowra have got Breakout River Meats and Cowra Lamb. So we're back at Cowra, and I find them good people to deal with. I'd say that there was a fair up this week with a couple of batches of lambs that went over there, but we seem to have sort of sorted out some sort of a solution, luckily. But I think that they've just rationalised a little bit of, I'm hoping that they've just touched wood, that they've rationalised what they're doing in terms of trying to get rid of some of their problems by culling their client list down. But, you know, otherwise we'll be off to Picton like everyone else, I guess.
Yeah. And the acacias?
Everything that grows we're in a box gum grassy woodland type scenario, so we're just looking at what's here. You can go out to Garooyaroo or Mulligan's Flat and see what's there, but I'm guided by people from, I look at Mary Bonnet in the eye here, who was at Landcare, and Jenny, and a dad who were at Greening Australia, and these people have guided me in what to plant, and it's everything, you know, from Acacia genestifolia that's flowering on the shortest day of the year through to the stuff that's flowering on the longest day of the year and everything in between. It's about, I think, 26 species locally, and they're all in abundance. And the sheep will eat different ones at different times, and they love the seeds as well. So it's really good for the sheep, but it's really important for the broader ecosystem.
Yep, fabulous. No, totally on board with that. I think that's a great one. And just for reference, locally we have she oaks, the casuarinas or alocasuarinas, and the brachychitons, the currajongs. And all the wattles, they're all palatable. And if you're in a rotation so that they get a nibble and then it gets to rest, then you've got an option for them to be able to have that access. And thinking about animal welfare, if you have a spot where they can get to in each of the rotations, where when it's really windy or really hot or really cold, then they also can kind of nestle and make sure that they don't go through the stress of that extreme weather.
So just on that, I think our approach has taken 25 years to get here, but we're adopting, and this is through Wardy over in the corner and Greening Australia, we're adopting Whopper program that came out of Graham Fifield and Brian Cumberland and Leon Gary from Binalong's work, where we're looking at recreating about the same amount of density, about 200 stems per hectare of box gum grassy woodland, so about 20% of the paddock under canopy cover, if you want to think of it like that. And that allows grass to grow everywhere. It's not a forest where it's denuded of grass underneath. But you can't do that with set stocking. You just cannot leave animals in there or they will destroy them. But, if you've got good rotation, and think of people like Marshy over at Burrawa, then you're going to get only, a dozen days or 15 days of grazing a year, or maybe 20 if you really leave them in there a fair while. And with the long rest, everything copes with that. They'll take a bit of a flogging from time to time, but everything recovers, and that's everything from callistemons to hardened bergias, and they will self-seed, so you don't have to go back in and replant. They'll look after themselves. So.
And in times gone by, and maybe even on some farms, there were browsers, native marsupial browsers, that were nibbling on these things in the past and cycling that nutrients. But so important for the rumen of both cows and sheep and goats to be able to make sure that they're getting a good balance in the fields. Well, we have Luke over here has been doing floristic surveys for a multi-species trial that we've got going on in the ACT. We have 6 farmers who are part of the multi-species grazing trial, which has a combination of rotational grazing and different plots, which also have multi-species with amendments, and then also multi-species without any. And that's going to run over the next 5 years, so that'll be up and going. But the reason I'm pointing to Luke in this is that we were talking yesterday morning or the morning before about some of the floristic surveys of paddocks that were looking, they're looking, if you looked back, you go, oh, there's not much going on there. It has been, on and off, set stocked and those sorts of things. But we were finding sometimes there was 30 species that were there. Now, if you change your rotations to allow for full recovery before the animals come back in, then there's going to be even more than 30 species. Now, that gives them an opportunity, that gives the animals that are moving through that an opportunity to be able to have a real diversity of species in their gut. And they'll take what they need at the times of the year, just like what Vince was just saying. And if you can incorporate into it species which are potential fodder species that are shrubs, then that also can tick that box as well. So that's something that we'll be working on over the next few years through our Shelter Belt program that we've got. That's in the ACT. So now, Cressida, we have a question for you around what happens to your weaned sheep once they've gone through the weaning process. What's your process?
Basically, the males all go through the sale yards. So they're not meat sheep. There's a big difference. Just like cows, people don't sort of think about it with sheep, but the difference between dairy sheep and meat sheep is exactly the same as cows. So they go through the sale yards. We do keep some as stud animals, and then we have the replacement ewes for the dairy. So we keep the best of the ewes.
Yep, great. Now this is around the 2 options of whether you have more sale points, like diversity and dispersal of the sale points, compared to having a central food hub. And so I was wondering if you would like to talk around that, because there's a couple of different models, and I would say it's not either or, it's and. But maybe you can talk around this idea of having a central place compared to having little farm shops all over the place and boxes being delivered and over at the farmers markets on Saturday mornings and off at the restaurants, etc., etc. Because, direct to market is so many things. But yeah, please speak.
Actually, I just want to quickly say nature likes diversity, so I would always trend that way. But I also wanted actually Julie, who's here and is just now trying to, well, they already run a food hub in Bright, co-op, and they're applying to expand that. But I think it's a super interesting model of disaggregated aggregation, if you like. So Julie, would you like to quickly speak to that? She's so stoked I threw her in.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So yeah, we're a Bright in northeastern Victoria is a town of 2,620 people. They set up a food hub maybe 5 years ago, and now that's grown to a point where it has an online order system that has generated enough income to employ a person to run that order cycle. It's a volunteer, not-for-profit based organisation, and has established a network of 17 local producers across vegetables, meat, dairy, both milk and cheese, mushrooms, fish, bread, eggs. So we've become a genuine alternative to shopping at the supermarket. And what we're trying to do, applying for this Vic Health funding, is liaise with another couple food hubs in our area. So we've got King Valley down a little bit further south. Again, a volunteer-led, smaller community. Slightly different model, but quite similar, focusing on chemically free, food produced chemically free, local production, short supply chains, direct interaction with producers. And then we've got another group up in Corryong, Acres and Acres, who they started up out of the bushfire thing where Corryong was sort of without food for a very long time. So they tried to create a food hub with more local resilience, or to create more local resilience by engaging with their producers and providing a direct avenue to market through their food hub. So what we're trying to do is basically grow a number of small food hubs in the northeastern Victoria, so all sort of not-for-profit, direct contact with producers, producers involved in the actual operations of the co-op. So I think someone talked about that before, how important it is to have the farmers involved in the process as well. And yeah, that's what we're trying to do, roll it out across northeastern Victoria. So we've got a pilot running where we've got another couple food hubs that are about to establish as well. And part of our funding application involves a logistics network to service that, because we've got a very wide area to cover. And that is one of the issues with getting, I think, both for farmers, producers, but also consumers, is actually getting local food into the communities. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
That's a really interesting model. We'd like to pick your brains on that.
I think also, if I could speak to that a little, when we talk about, having a food hub in Canberra, like that's a starting point, but we're not suggesting that there would be one behemoth in the middle of town where everyone would get all of their food, right? Think about hub and spoke. So there would be a food hub maybe with a wash and pack station, and then there might be another food hub that has a boning room attached to it, and maybe another food hub that has a commercial kitchen attached to it, and then suddenly we've got a network and a community of food hubs that are, positioned in different places for different parts of for the community, for different parts of Canberra to access and the region to access. And I think something that we've not necessarily spoken a lot about, although you did, Cressida, speaking about restaurants, is that when you direct to market in restaurants, often owners of restaurants don't want to deal with multiple different multiple different producers. They don't want to have to pay an invoice to their lamb guy and their pork guy and their chicken guy and their egg guy. They just want to be able to go to one central supplier because that's more convenient for them. And so there's also a sense of, and especially when it comes to scale as well, very small producers may not be able to supply what restaurants need to be able to keep functioning. And so if we can aggregate things and work together in that way, a food hub might also look like a wholesale distribution centre to local restaurants. And wouldn't that be cool if the local restaurants in Canberra were all using local produce from around the area?
Yep, that's great. That's really valuable. So I guess we just maybe one last question just around the wash and pack. And maybe, Lucy, you might be the person to speak to around this, maybe, maybe not. Maybe even you, Tammi, in this. So people aren't aware, and somebody mentioned it earlier, that we have, if you produce melons, leafy greens, or soft fruits, the heavy hand of the law has come down on the small farmer now to make them go through a process which could be enough to be able to push them off the capacity to be able to do that. And so if anybody knows, if they grow melons, soft fruits, or leafy greens, there's not actually a huge margin in this space. And so unless you're mega scale, or unless you're micro scale, like Fiona, then it's very hard to be able to justify financially that process. So is there anything happening? The question is there anything happening as a pushback so that we can rationalise between the different layers of farming that is occurring in Australia? The big end of town, who've got like 1,000 acres of one lettuce variety, or down to people who've got a half an acre and producing great food.
Yeah, well, the New South Wales body who are going to be overseeing those legislative changes, they went out for public consultation 2 weeks before Christmas, and you had 2 weeks to put your feedback to their plans, which is, I would argue, not really public consultation at all. So there is pushback, but the government doesn't always make it easy to provide that feedback. There's still some questions around what the water regulations are going to look like with that new legislation. So that's still very much an unknown, and I think that's part of what's causing a lot of stress for people at the moment, in that there's change coming. It's very unclear what that's going to look like, and it's going to be administered and overseen differently by different council areas and state by state as well. So what ends up happening in New South Wales is going to look different possibly to what happens in the ACT, to what happens in Victoria, to what happens in Queensland. So that's all going to cause a lot of issues as well. And I know Tammy's got more to say on that.
So this started in 2017. For SANS, the Food Standards Australia New Zealand started this in 2017. They said, we're worried, we're doing a food safety review. We think we need to clamp down on leafy greens, melons, and berries, because there had been 11 incidences of foodborne illness in like 12 years. Berries from imported berries that had been packaged in New Zealand and imported to Australia, so it wouldn't capture them. Melons from like 1,000-hectare farms up north, and leafy greens from monocultures. I can't remember where they're from, but industrial monocultures. Every single one of those foodborne illnesses came from a system that has a QA system, because they all sell into supermarkets. So they're already under the tightest regulation we have. But so the first round they went back and they didn't bring it in. A year later they came back and they did another round of inquiry, and this time they pushed through and said, we're getting new standards. And so after the Food Sovereignty Alliance has been in there advocating against that from the beginning, and Big Hort kind of also pushed back in some ways, but when they got these assurances that they wouldn't be affected if they had an existing QA program, the very one that it went through, they wouldn't have to have the new standards applied because they come under the QA. So the only ones affected are the smallholders who were not already under QA programs. And to Lucy's point about different jurisdictions, New South Wales has been the worst in terms of they don't respond. They're the only ones who don't give us meetings. We've had meetings with every other state basically, but New South Wales just like talked to the hand. I finally, through our department in Victoria, got a contact for New South Wales, but like it's taken us years to penetrate that. So, and every state's different, but it looks like New South Wales and Queensland have had the most industry influence, so the implementation is likely to be the most onerous for the farmers in those states. Whereas Victoria, AgVict worked really closely with us, and they're not interested in even pursuing us for implementation, smallholders, in the first year. They said you've got like a year's grace basically before we start coming to your farms. And they've done a tiered registration in terms of the pricing, the number of audits. They've actually scaled it as best they could under the new standard. Whereas we can't say that for the states that have bigger hort.
Okay, great. All right, well, we might wrap it up in, yes, please, yep.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the Food Sovereignty Alliance is still interacting with all of the states. So if you join the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance, then you'll see in our newsletters if there's another process underway, and you're super welcome to get involved. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, so we're now moving into the next phase, which is our breakout session. And so I'm going to hand over to. Oh, hang on, just one thing. Tammi would like to give a plug. Do you want to? Yeah, I can do it.
I mean, I'll say what it is.
Yeah,
but
go on.
I forgot to mention, and Julie said it's very silly of me not to mention, that I published a cookbook as a fundraiser for our abattoir. And it's like a handbook to improve the food system in the most delicious way, disguised as a cookbook. So every section has like politics of eggs, politics of fat, politics of dairy. So you get a sort of 1 or 2 page download of the food system before you then get to figure out how to cook delicious things if you don't already. So it's $65, and then we're selling them out there if people want to help raise the last funds for our abattoir.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Lyndall?
All right, now another plug. So final plug, I think, for today, for the ACT Farmers Forum dinner. So you can still get tickets because apparently the chef can handle the last minute increases in number. There is already a good number of people going, so I think it's going to be a great event. So if you do want to get into that, jump on. We might let our panel members, we might thank them and let them
thank you very
jump
much
off the
for
stage.
doing that, and come on down. Yep.